Welcome back to the Coffee Hour. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
It is Monday, September 23rd. Right around the corner is the LCMS Disaster Response Conference. In studio with us this morning, the Reverend Michael Meyer, manager for LCMS Disaster Response. Good morning, Pastor Meyer.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us in studio this morning. There are always disasters happening, it seems like. That's always keeping you busy, right?
Yeah, we rarely go through a month where something doesn't happen, that we engage our LCMS ministries across the United States or our partner churches around the world in providing aid and counsel as we seek to show mercy. It's rare that a month goes by that we're not doing something with somebody.
At the LCMS Disaster Response Conference, quite often we look at case studies and other examples from the past of where congregations, districts, where Lutherans have stepped up to be able to serve their neighbors through acts of mercy following a disaster. What are some of the stories that have come out of the last few years that really help us understand what LCMS Disaster Response is all about and what we're going to gain at the conference?
Yeah, really, I think in these case studies, you're going to see the partnership between congregations, the district, and then also the synod. So we've got a couple of different case studies that are going to be at our conference this year, one regarding Hurricane Michael and the church there, Trinity Lutheran Church in Panama City. This happened in Florida right around last year around this time. And the storm there was a tremendous wind event. They went back and recategorized the hurricane as Cat 5. So they recognized that it was a Cat 5 that hit the panhandle there, and just trees down everywhere, power lines, everything, and so there's a number of stories that are going to come from this one. The church opening its doors as a resource center where they were distributing food and clothes and other supplies to the community for months on end. We helped give a small grant to help staff that, as well as to coordinate volunteers that were primarily, in this case, doing chainsaw work, debris removal, those kind of things. There wasn't a lot of flooding, at least in the Panama City area. It was almost all wind, but to see the destruction that, I mean, if you were still to drive there today, you would still see a lot of debris that has yet to be removed still. Wow. Because it was so broad. Some people might have, driven through the path of a tornado before, and you'd see 100 yards wide where the tornado was on the ground and trees were this way and that way. Well, with Hurricane Michael, this was miles and miles. It was probably, I'd say you could drive for what would be about 50 miles across where this hit. And it would seem like a huge tornado came in and hit it. So you just would drive and go on and on and on and never reach the end of it. And there's one pastor there, Pastor Eric's. He's on the east side of Panama City, and he was telling the story. They had people sheltering in the church during the storm that weren't able to evacuate, and it grew so fast, so big, so fast that a lot of people didn't get out. They were saying, "Oh, it's going to be a Category 2," and the people were like, "Yeah, that's all right. Well, we can weather that." And then overnight, it was a Cat 5, Cat 4, almost Cat 5, and then they went back and redid it. And so people didn't have a chance to get out then. And so they were sheltering in the storm. And the pastor there, he actually had family. I think he had children, grown children, that lived several miles from the church, and they were in their house. And he ends up getting into his vehicle in the middle of the storm and going out to get them. Because they had lost power at their house, and they didn't think their house was going to make it. So he went out to get them. And in the process, they picked somebody up off the street who's just kind of wandering around dazed. And so he picked somebody, and they come back. They're going around power lines and down trees, and they just barely make it back into the church. It's an amazing story, and I can't wait to hear him share that and other stories to our constituents that are going to be at the conference.
So that will he be presenting?
Yeah, he's one of the guys presenting at our conference. We have Randall Eriks, who's the pastor at Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, and Paul McCormack, who is the pastor at Trinity Lutheran Church in Panama City.
That is such a heart of love and of mercy to other people in the middle of. Not everyone's going to leave a building in safety and go out into whirling winds just to go get. I mean, even you love people, but I mean that's terrifying.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and the eye went right over their church.
Oh, wow.
So they had a period of calm, right? You hear this story of there being 30 minutes of calm, and then it just picks up again from the other direction. And so it's just terrifying for those folks. And they didn't have running water anymore. That stopped, and so they had 30 people, I think, in the bottom of this the basement of the church, and they're sharing restrooms as best they can, and what little food that they have, they're sharing it, and they're singing hymns, and reading scripture, and doing those things that we know that the world cannot give, and get that peace that they receive from those things, and calm in the midst of the storm.
Singing hymns as Lutherans do.
Yep.
How does being prepared and having the knowledge going just before a disaster happens, how does being prepared in disaster response help churches reach out to their communities with witnessing the love of Jesus and mercy in these times after the disaster happens?
Well, on the front side of things, being prepared is so incredibly valuable. It means making connections in the community, of talking with maybe the county emergency management office and the director for the county, and saying, hey, we'd like to be a resource after a disaster. And when you make those connections beforehand, and the conversation takes place beforehand, you can say, okay, there's other groups that have already approached this director and and they've said, well, we can provide food or water and shelter, maybe with the Red Cross. And then your group can determine where are the gaps. We don't want to provide something that we know another group is already doing, so it wouldn't make sense for us to duplicate that. What's something unique that we can be known for as Lutherans? I mean, aside from the preaching of the gospel, that of course is unique to us, but in showing mercy, those acts of love, there's always a gap. There's always an area that other groups are ignoring, or they don't have the capacity to do. And so we can step in then and prepare ahead of time with water, perhaps with spiritual care resources, with volunteer management and coordination, those kind of things.
So the LCMS Disaster Response Conference coming up October 2nd through the 4th right here in St. Louis at Concordia Seminary is an opportunity to really to dig into the stories like you were just sharing, to learn from those stories, because we know not every situation is the same, not every context, not every congregation not every community is the same, but there are things that we can learn from these stories. So it's an opportunity to come together and do that. Tell us more of the details about the upcoming conference here in St. Louis.
Yeah, so it's not just case studies. We also look at some some practical things, what can go into a trailer, and then there's also times for networking. So much of what we do is interacting with others, because after a disaster, everybody wants to help, but they don't always know how, they don't know who to talk to. And so what sometimes happens is you have 1,000 people all calling one local pastor, right? And that is completely overwhelming for that one pastor or church worker, whoever it may be, to receive all of these phone calls. So if we network beforehand with our district coordinators, with the other people who are engaged with their groups of disaster, we talk together, we know, and we build a trust that says, you know what, we're going to get the information out to each other. We're going to share, maybe this group over here has flood buckets, this group has chainsaw teams, and we have that conversation beforehand at the conference. And this time we actually do have a special time set aside just for our district coordinators to network and have like a roundtable discussion. And it's a best practices of sorts, where we say, these are some of the things that have worked for us in disaster, and also here are some things that haven't worked, that aren't useful. And so that's very helpful for us as well, to look at those areas that we can do better in.
Now, I understand there was a chainsaw training event scheduled for this as well. Is that full already? I know that there was limited registration for this event.
Yeah, it is limited registration. I think we might have 1 or 2 spots for the hands-on portion for Saturday on the 5th. It's kind of like a PS, right, at the end of a letter. So this is the postscript that says, all right, it's not something that everybody's going to engage in. Now, we do have a number of openings for the Friday night session, which is the safety part of it. It's the in-classroom. You learn the inner workings of it, how to safely behave around those who are using chainsaws. So these would be people who would be pullers, who would get the debris out once something's cut. They pull the branches out, take them to the side of the street, or other safety officers, health officers that would be a part of a team, but wouldn't necessarily be running the chainsaw, but still need to go to the safety part of it, the right attire and those kind of things.
How much of disaster response is primarily just being able to be organized as a team, as a congregation, to really stay organized or to be organized after a disaster, and managing communication as well? You mentioned earlier, like thousands of people calling one pastor, and that can be just overwhelming. How much of disaster response is primarily communication and organization?
I'd say half of it is that.
Yeah,
and it's the overlooked half, right? Because everybody wants to just go and help, but if we don't coordinate, then we can just kind of get in the way and gum up the works. And so when we go through our training, our alert training, we talk about the coordination side of things, to not just show up unannounced without having talked with anybody, without having made those connections, because then you can get in the way and actually slow things down and create a bigger problem. So a lot of it also is, what was the other word you said with communication?
Organization.
Yeah, organization. It's just so important.
LCMS Disaster Response Conference. Check out lcms.org/disaster. You can find more information there for the upcoming conference, October 2nd through the 4th, right here at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis. The Reverend Michael Meyer, manager, LCMS Disaster Response. Thanks for being our guest on the Coffee Hour.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Coming up in just a little bit, Long Gospel with Pastor Baker. I'm Andy Bates.
I'm Sarah Golseth.
Thanks for joining us for the Coffee Hour.
The Coffee Hour with Andy and Sarah is a production of KFUO. To support the Coffee Hour and KFUO Radio, visit KFUO.org. You can also text KFUO to 41444 or send an email to gifts@KFUO.org. And you can call us at 800-844-0524. KFUO. Christ for you, anytime, anywhere.